cap off our week of talking about writer's block, we're going to be looking at some practical tools you can use to keep yourself from getting blocked. My name is Seth. I'm a full-time fantasy author. I've written 26 books. I've published most of them, and I make these videos because there are a lot of authors out there who feel a little bit lost, and I don't want you to be one of them. Earlier this week, we've already talked about decision fatigue and how to avoid it. We've talked about outcome anxiety and how you can use the make bad art principle to keep yourself moving forward. Let's dive right into some practical tools you can use to crush writer's block. The first is incredibly simple and so very hard to do, or at least it can feel like it's so very hard to do. And that is write during your highest energy time. One thing that we don't talk about often is how everybody has a different biological clock. And that clock runs through the day, and then we sleep, and when we sleep, we're wound back up. What's interesting, though, is not every clock runs the same way. Different people have different amounts of energy at different times of day. That's why we get the idea that some people are morning people and some people are night people. Really, all we're saying is that some people operate better early in the morning and some people operate better late at night. But the reality is that there are also people who operate better in the middle of the day, or the middle of the morning, or the middle of the afternoon. It's different for every single person. If you can figure out when you operate best, when you are at peak energy, then you're also going to be able to identify the best time for you to write. Now, I can hear the protests starting already, but Seth, what if I have a job? What if I have responsibilities? What if I have all of this stuff that I have to do during that precious time? Well, the unfortunate reality is that you either have to stop doing that other stuff, shifting your life around until you can write during that period of time, or you just have to pick the next best time. You know, this is one of the things about being a writer before you can go full time that's really hard, because often you have to write during periods when you are not at your peak. It's helped a little bit if you are an early morning person, because typically you can get up early before you have to go to work, before your responsibilities for the day start, and you can get your writing done then. But some people aren't. Some people operate way better late at night, which is okay. You just need to pick that time and prioritize writing. Regardless of when you're at peak performance during the day, it's really important that you understand it and you start developing your writing habit during that period of time. You're going to find yourself 20 to 50% more productive during that period of time, and that productivity will compound over time as you get into the habit of writing. Now, what does this have to do with writer's block? Well, as we talked about earlier this week, writer's block often comes from decision fatigue. And so we want to make sure that we're trying to write in these peak energy times. Because when we do that, we're going to make it much harder for ourselves to have decision fatigue. Does that make sense? So that's our first practical tip. Pick the times of day when you are at the highest energy levels to write. The second practical tip for overcoming writer's block is predetermine what you're going to write. Make all your decisions beforehand. Don't put yourself in a position where you're having to make conscious decisions about what you're going to move to next in the middle of your writing. When we're writing, we want to generate flow, because when we generate flow, we're going to have the best experience. How do you generate flow? As we've talked about previously, you need to make sure that the challenge of what you're writing and your ability to write it are evenly matched. And additionally, you need to have clarity in what you're trying to achieve. Well, where does clarity come from? Clarity comes from making decisions. And so if you pre-make these decisions before you sit down to write, you are going to have an easier time getting into flow. This is actually one of the advantages that people who plot heavily have over people who just write by the seat of their pants. Because they're pre-making so many decisions, it becomes much easier for them to step into a flow state and to be highly productive. When we pre-make our decisions, there just isn't space for writer's block because we already know what it is we're going to do. Now, different people are going to have different levels of comfort with pre-making decisions. I like to make some decisions ahead of time and then allow others to generate spontaneously as I'm writing. And everybody has a slightly different level of comfort with those pre-made decisions. But the important thing is that you are making decisions, that you are doing that work ahead of time before you sit down to write so you know where you're going. And then the third and final tip for overcoming writer's block is to get your reps in. It's just to write more frequently in shorter bursts to make sure that we are setting a habit in our head. One of the most dangerous things about not writing when we have writer's block is that reinforces the choice not to write. Believe it or not, practically everything in life is a choice. Sometimes it doesn't feel like we have a choice. Sometimes we sit down and we stare at our blank page and we think to ourselves, I don't have a choice. I just can't write. But that's not true. You can write. You could write about something completely different from your manuscript. You could write about pigs flying. You could write about blue trains trying to climb hills. You could write about any number of things. You could write about paint drying. You always have the choice to write. And so reinforcing that choice and making sure that you are keeping yourself in a rhythm of making a positive choice to write is so vitally important, especially if you are prone to writer's block. You might think of it as the difference between lifting for strength and lifting for impressive looking muscles when you go to the gym. If you're trying to become strong, what you need are lots of little reps. A lot of little reps. If you're trying to just have big muscles, then you want to lift really heavy weights. But as writers, we're not trying to have big muscles. We're trying to be strong. And so what we need to do is we need to practice over and over and over and over again. And the best way to do that is with shorter reps that reinforce that decision to write over and over again. So I hope you found these tips helpful. Make sure that you're writing during your high energy times. Make sure that you are predetermining what it is you're going to write, plotting out as much as is comfortable for you before you get started, and do it over and over again. Put in the reps so that you're reinforcing that positive decision to write every single time. I'm also curious if you have any ways that you like to overcome writer's block. If you do, leave me a comment down below and I'll make sure to respond.